particularly the Madras Presidency. And this, how they interacted in the course of this time of at least up to the beginning of the dawn of the 20th century. That is, I am going to concentrate in this lecture. Let me now start the lecture with to say very warm good afternoon for everybody. And so many of me be my colleagues and my senior historians. And for all of them, I thank even in advance for attending my lecture on this topic. Thank you. During the last two decades of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century, a great change had manifested itself in the spirit of the educated classes of India. English education brought about changes in the situation in the 19th century, first because it was foreign, and secondly because it became increasingly the passport to position of profit and influence. But even English education did not succeed in completely divorcing its recipients in India from their family and social matrix. The introduction of railways and the development of communication enabled even people of remotest part of attend the festivals of major temples and also to make pilgrimage to distant holy places. The gathering of the festivals and pilgrimages also proved to be factors that increased the Hindu consciousness among the Indians. Even Western educated Hindus, despite their intellectual skepticism and radical outpourings in the press and on the platform, rarely missed the family and communal ceremonies, be they Brahmins or non-Brahmins, matriculates or graduates, administrators or lawyers. They continue to adhere faithfully to many of the time-honored customs, particularly the laws governing commensality of among them. The Gilbert Bill, according to which the Indians were declared unfit to sit in judgment over a European accused, also had undone those notions of superiority of Western thought and culture among the educated intelligentsia. Religiously, the new feeling created what was practically a counter-reformation. A large number of religious movements appeared and all of them were distinctly opposed to Brahmo Samaj and the Prarthana Samaj and the Christianity. Farka divided these movements into two groups, those which insisted on good deal of reform and those which laid all their emphasis on defense of the old faiths. The first group included the Arya Samaj and the Dayananda Saraswati and the Radha Soyamis and the Deva Samaj. The other group contained a large number of movements, and the most important of them were the Ramakrishna Mission of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and the Theosophical Society of Colonel H.S. Alcott and Madame Blavatsky. Ramakrishna was a true Hindu and was ready to any moment, ready at any moment to defend the whole of Hinduism. But when he realized that Christianity and to some extent Islam had become living forces in India, he declared that all religions were true, that in their inner essence they were identical, and that each man should remain in the religion in which he had been born. Hence, his defense of everything Hindu and his theory that all religions were true provided even the ordinary Hindu with power to meet the criticism of Christians and the Brahmo Samajists. After Ramakrishna's death, Vivekananda took the reins. Vivekananda was not satisfied with the work of the social reformers, and to him, social reform had neither produced nor permanent and neither produced any permanent and valuable results, nor had been appreciated throughout the country. He was of the opinion that the Indians were the most moral and the most godly people, and their institutions were, in their plan and purpose, best suited to make mankind happy. Since he was not for any reformation, he asked his countrymen to go forward and complete the practical realization of the scheme of human progress laid out in the most perfect order of their ancestors. According to Vivekananda, every particle of Hinduism was of value and must be retained. The reformers, he said, were mistaken for in trying to uproot the weeds, they were they were tearing up the precious wheat also. The Theosophical Society stood for another revival movement in India. It stood for orthodoxy, the react for reaction, for inactivity, and for inertia. The Theosophists taught that skepticism and materialism had eaten out the life of the nation. The crowds of the so-called English educated class were followers of Huxley, Mill, and Spencer and had entirely forgotten their own literature. This spiritualization had brought about national degeneration. There was no activity of national life, no pulsing of the national heart. The Theosophical movement wished to halt this so called process of denationalization and revived the religious value of Hindu teachings. Hence, they glorified the Vedas and Upanishads and emphasized the value of Indian thought and the heritage of the Indian people. The Theosophists made their inroads in South India only after 1881. The first branch of the society in the south was formed in Tirunelveli. In their second longer visit to the presidency, Alcott and Blavatsky appealed to the citizens of Madras to work for the restoration of India's ancient religion, for the vindication of her ancient glory, for the maintenance of her greatness in science, in the arts, and philosophy. As a response to this appeal, Madras branch of the Theosophical Society was formed with Ranganatha Rao and President G. Muthuswami Chetty and P. Srinivasa Rao as Vice President, and T. Subbarao as Secretary. Later, the headquarters of the society itself was shifted from Bombay to Madras in December 1882. In 1883, Alcott undertook an extensive tour of the presidency. In his view, it was the tour which started the Hindu revival in South India. Though Alcott could proudly claim that society had enlisted in its ranks the flower of Indian people, it made no headway among the majority of the non-Brahmins. Since theosophy appealed only to the Western educated Brahmins and higher non-Brahmin caste, however, theosophy was acceptable to the educated Indians on one account of its broad national basis. The Madras Mail wrote that the success of the theosophical movement is to be found in the undoubted fact that of late years there has been a decided revival of national Indian feeling. A new generation has realized to some extent the truth that Indians ought to be one. European scholars have taught them not certainly to know their own classics, for that is what few can boast of, but to believe in them. If once it should become possible to regard Hindu literature, science, and religion as ahead of the times, nothing would be wanting to enable the Hindu to claim himself not only as a equal but as the superior of the Europeans. The Indian national consciousness required to be built upon some of the common elements of its own. The Western educated Hindus had tried to discover that commonness in their ancient achievements, for example, in the field of religion, science, and philosophy, and by glorifying the virtues of some of the country's social and cultural institutions and traditions. It was in this climate that Theosophy breathed a new sense of pride into Hindus and replaced the old myth of India's inferiority with a new myth of India's superiority. The Theosophical movement had struck the very core of the revivalist program when it drew the attention of the Indians to their past heritage and worked to mobilize the popular enthusiasm towards the so-called national religion, based upon the Sanskrit classics such as the Vedas and Shastras. Accordingly, in 1883, a committee under the chairmanship of Gajapati Rao had recommended to start Sanskrit schools in Mylapore, Madras, and which example was later followed in other towns like Madurai and Tiruchirappalli. A resolution was also passed at the 1884 annual conference of Josephists calling for the formation of, in all centers, of an Aryan League of Honor to stir up a strong feeling of love for the cause of Aryan moral regeneration. The Adayar Oriental Library was formally opened in December 1886 at a ceremony participated by Hindu religious dignitaries to educate men, especially the rising generation. As Hinduism began to acquire a new consciousness of its own strength, it spread a feverish sensitiveness among the students of Indians. This became evident in the Christian college disturbances of April 1888. During the last quarter of the 19th century, During the last quarter of the 19th century, the orthodoxy was better organized and was more active. In 1873, a group of Hindus formed in Calcutta the Sanatana Dharma Rakshini Sabha for Association for the Defense of the Eternal Religion, inspired by the national organizations such as the Indian National Congress and the National Social Conference. A congress of Hindu religious leaders was formed in 1890 under the name of the Hindu Dharma Mahamandali. All these organizations aimed at defending Orthodox Hinduism, hence denounced the social reform movements as an attempt to exterminate the Sanatana Dharma. The rise of the neo-Hindu spirit and the example set by the movements of Ramakrishna and Alcott had the effect of stirring each of the chief Hindu sects defend itself and to take various efforts for the strengthening of the community. And all the leading Hindu sects, both Vaishnavist and Saivist, have formed associations for the defense of their sects, and Jains, Buddhists, Parsis, and Mohammedans also followed their example in establishing their own institutions. The epoch of Hindu revival was justified by the nationalist scholar as a welcome trend. Bipin Chandra Pal, for example, clarified that the social reaction and religious revival possessed the Hindu mind all over India and offered an effective check for a time to our religious and social reform movements. It was not really an honest return to popular or current Hinduism. The spirit of self assertion and this growing anti British feeling materially changed the angle of our thoughts and activities in every department of life, religious and social, no less political. This was really the beginning of that conflict of cultures and national consciousness that were shaped and molded in a very large and increasing extent the history and evolution of modern Indian thought and life. This school thought rather tried to justify that the Hindu revival of this period was neither meant to be the revival of Hindu orthodoxy, nor was the revivalism socially reactionary. Instead, they argued that it widened the scope of social reform. The period roughly from 1880s to 1910 was revivalist, having the mark of traditional, liberal, extremist, and integral nationalism. And the revivalists believed that the Indian culture and religion could be the basis of the future civilization of the mankind. Another feature of the period was that, keeping in tune with political nationalism, the social reform movement after 1885 became more attuned to the national sentiments and reached a wider section of the people. During the period after 1880, a new spirit had characterized the social reform movement. Earlier reformists like Rajaram Mohan Rai and Vidyasagar were actuated mainly by the philanthropic motive. Their object was to bring relief to certain individuals, but with the awakening of national consciousness, another and perhaps a stronger motive, the motive of national efficiency, has come into play. It is realized that The disabilities of individuals do not affect those individuals alone, but their influence goes much farther and weakens and undermines the social fabric. We now feel that when we educate our girls or allow widows to remarry or elevate the depressed classes, we are not only doing justice to them but adding to the efficiency and strength of our society as a whole. By this time, sufficient modernization had taken place in India, especially as regards the spread of education, the growth of mass communication, increased urbanization, and the rise of the new professional classes to provide conditions for the creation of a national organization on the conventional model. Agitation in the press and through public meetings, conferences, memorials, and petitions had become a normal feature of Indian public life even before the 1880s. When the Indian Association of Surendranath Banerjee gained wider appeal, the first Indian National Conference met in 1883. Soon after, Malabari proposed National Association for Social Reforms. The early years of 1880s, the social reformers of Madras, inspired by the political leaders, tried to have a closer contact with the like-minded people in other parts of South India. This new urge was activated when a political conference of that kind was held in Madras in December 1884. Accordingly, South Indian Conference was convened by the Hindu Women's Remarriage Association on 31 December 1884. The success of such conferences at regional level had encouraged many reformers in South India to feel the need to broaden their scope to embrace other regions of India. The organizing of the Indian National Congress in 1885 served to inspire the reformers like Raghunath Rao. Raghunath Rao and his supporters tried to get social issues discussed at the Congress. This was made possible even at the first meeting of the Indian National Congress in December 1885 at Bombay. W.C. Banerjee, the president, remarked that one of the objects of the Congress would be to record the matured opinion of the educated classes of India on some of the more important and pressing social questions of the day. Though reformers like Raghunath Rao and M.G. Ranade have very much impressed the first conference of the Indian National Congress with their forceful addresses, the social issues were abandoned at the Calcutta session in 1886 to oblige some who argued that, in view of the diversity of social arrangements in a vast country like India, it would not be convenient to discuss social matters at the Congress. Therefore, those interested in social issues decided to go ahead on their own, and the National Social Conference was convened in Madras in December 1887. The moving spirits behind it were Raghunath Rao and Mahadev Govinda Ranade. According to Ranade, a genuine natural social movement should spread to all classes and touch all hearts, both men and women. Ranade would not ignore political reform, and at the same time, he was not prepared to be complacent about social abuses and misery. The establishment of the Social Conference in 1887 at the national level was not accidental, for it was only a culmination of the spirit exhibiting during the years of 1880s by many other conferences, leagues, and committees, caste, communal, religious, and social advocating changes in life more on more in consonance with modern conditions. The newspapers and periodicals also played a notable role as agencies of social regeneration. The Madras meeting of the National Social Conference of 1887 resolved to hold annual national conferences in various centers of the country to create and mobilize the public awakening for the eradication of India's social evils. Sorry. Among sorry. It is rather fitting to mention about the significant role played by Ranade in organizing the social force on a national scale. In India, there are differences of subjects, differences of caste, difference of provinces and districts, differences of languages, spread the workers, separated the workers from one another. Justice Ranade sympathized with all these movements, and in that sympathy, he realized the great truth of the unity of them all. And it was the greatest work of his life that he labored to give outward expression to this unity, the National Social Conference, which he founded and fostered with all parents' care, was conceived and created by him as a visible embodiment of the unity of social reform. The second meeting of National Social Conference, which met at Allahabad in 1888, resolved, in addition to the earlier declared objects, to affiliate provincial committees in different parts of India. It was the intention of the conference, declared Ranade, to strengthen the local associations and to furnish information to each association and province and to stimulate active interest by mutual sympathy and cooperation. According to him, Indians were as strictly national socially as they were politically. The Allahabad Conference, sorry, the National Social Conference stood for deliberations, persuasion, creating public opinion, and not for compulsion in matters of social reform. The resolutions of the conference were only intended to be recommendations to the local associations and were not binding on those who disapproved of them. The National Social Council adopted the method of basing reforms on the ancient scriptures and interpreted them so as to suit to the new requirements of the times. This was believed to be the most suitable method for dealing with the masses and making them feel that there was no attempt of innovation. In this context, it is to be noticed here that in the ninth session of the National Social Conference, it was resolved to persuade the religious heads of different sects to bless the cause of social reform, and it was hoped that if religious heads could take kindly to the reform movement, popular opposition would melt away. It is interesting to note that the spirit of nationalizing the social problems and its movement went to the extent of even inviting Mohammedans to join hands with them in removing the social abuses. At this time, the leaders who were prominent in this rank task were Raghunath Rao and G. Subramaniya. Raghunath Rao, who had been urging in vain the government to appoint expert commission to codify the Hindu law based on the Shastras, now changed his mind to support this piecemeal legislation within the limits of the provisions of the Shastras. G. Subramanian, on the other hand, based his arguments on the Western rationalist thoughts to justify the governmental intervention on social problems. He had a strong conviction that the social reform was much more necessity and immediate task than the political one. Before the Indians. In the Hindu, the most influenced native journal of the time, he expressed the following sentiments. To quote, this is his editorial. Certain political privileges will not alone bring about this grand consummation to make the India morally as well as numerically a great nation. There must be an earnest and steady work in the field of social as well as political reform. A radical change is necessary in many of our customs and institutions. But there is one evil which is a standing hindrance to reforms of every kind, and if that is remedied, the natural aptitudes of the nation will receive an unchecked stimulus towards development in all directions. We mean the present degraded condition of our women, the hard and unreasonable marriage laws, their seclusion, and their ignorance have made them entirely unfit for the exercise of that elevating and chastening privilege which is there by nature. The kitchen would cease to be their world. The priest should cease to be their moral preceptors. Cruel marriage laws should cease to rob them of their youth, and their minds should be opened by a high and liberal education. G. Subramanian wanted that social reform should be made as large as and as influential as the Congress. And this view became a real challenge to the already prevailing assumption that political reform must have priority over social reform. He was so sincere in his conviction that he celebrated the remarriage of his 12-year-old daughter at Bombay in 1889 during the session of the Fifth Congress. For he said that he could not face the lifelong misery of a daughter whom he loved his own soul and preferred the risk of excommunication. The Hindu and the Sudesamtran particularly devoted their editorial and correspondence columns as the forum for the debate on the merits and demerits of the proposed legislation on the age of consent. This led the Hindu into a controversy among the educated Indians. Managing to release the Hindu from the controversy, Veeraraghavachari, the managing proprietor of the paper, suggested the idea of a separate weekly paper solely devoted to social and moral reforms. And that is how the newspaper called Indian Social Reformer was established. It is to be noted here that some of the Hindu leaders who often identified themselves with liberal views and social reforms refrained from giving public expression of their views on the issue of the age of consent. When the Orthodox opposition tried to organize a mass rebellion, the supporters of the age of consent bill convened a public meeting in October 1890 and invited all the social reformers and leaders of the South to discuss this issue of great national importance. With a few dissenting views by persons like Sundaram Sastri and T.P. Gonalramaya, the meeting endorsed a petition to the Government of India to legislate the proposed bill on the age of consent. This made Madhava Rao to lead the Orthodox section of the people opposed to, and he planned to convene a meeting. Madhava Rao resigned from the National Social Conference for this purpose. The meeting, which was convened in December 1890, was adjourned without passing any resolution due to uncontrollable disorder. However, a second meeting resolved that the evils of the early consummation were too rare in South India to warrant preventive legislation. The age of consent bill was widely discussed in this presidency, both at public platform and in the press. Among the press which supported the issue were the Hindu, Sudesamtran, Andhra Prakashika, Kerala Patrika, and Kerala Sanchari. The Triplicate Literary Society seemed to have played a notable role in not only discussing the issue but also in submitting a petition to the Indian government with some creative suggestions, according to which the age of consent be raised to 14 and the scale of punishment be reduced. The attitude of the National Social Conference, which met at Calcutta in December 1890, perplexed many reformers in the country. The controversy over the bill reached its climax both in the Congress and in the National Social Conference at their Calcutta session. To prevent any possible damage to the national organization, Evo Hume proclaimed that majority portion of his native friends supported the age of consent bill. In January 1891, the bill was taken for discussion in the Supreme Legislative Council. Ramesh Chandra Mitra represented the sentiments of the opposition. Lansdowne refused to compromise on any suggestions regarding the amendments to the bill, and the Supreme Legislative Council passed an unamended age of consent bill in March 1891. The controversy over the age of consent bill exposed certain factors. It exposed the fact that the public in South India was largely opposed to this legislation. It also dispelled one popular myth, namely what the Western educated class was for social reform. The immediate consequence this controversy created was a clear cut division and rivalry between the traditional and progressive wing of the movement in future. Three current nationalism ran side by side between 1885 and 1920, and all of them, in varying degrees, served the social reform movement. Justice Vaswamy tried to assess the situation in his convocation address to the Madras University in 1940. As in politics, he said, as in politics, there are now three schools of thought which hold the field in social reform. There is the extreme left, which believes in violent upheavals and sudden changes. There is the moderate center, which believes in the combination of progress and order, and which trusts in persuasion and the creation of public opinion. And there is the extreme right, consisting of the conservative masses and the educated reactionaries who believe in the external value of institutions which were devised to suit environments now undergoing rapid changes. The immediate consequence of the controversy over the age of consent bill was the split among the social reformers into traditional wing and the rationalist wing. The traditional group had control since 1880s, and this control passed on to the hands of the rationalist wing during the debate over the bill. The rationalist wing included G. Subramaniaya, K. Subbarao, K. Nadarajan, and A. Subbarao. They were moderate but steady reformers, guided by the suggestions of science and reason, without looking to sastras or any writings of ancient personages for authority or sanction. When, when the infighting developed into an open challenge in 1892 at a function of the Hindu Marriage Association, the rationalist wing founded a separate forum, the Madras Hindu Social Reform Association, in November 1892, symbolizing a radical break with the Hindu tradition. The, the declared objectives of this new association were the promotion of female education, denouncing of the infant marriages, encouraging remarriages, etc. Both the press and the public platforms were literally used for their program. To this extent, the role played by the Indian social reformer was remarkable. On the other hand, the opposing and criticizing the rationalists, the traditionalists, and the revivalists narrowed their differences. This tirade against the rationalists was led by people like Raghunath Rao, S. Subramaniya, and M. Rangachari. They accused the rationalists as narrow dogmatists who were playing a kind of radical restlessness and destructive air, who made reform as a cover for almost all irreligious and vicious acts. In spite of the attempts by Ranade, the split between the rationalist and other remained unreconciled. The revivalist gained a powerful support from the Theosophical Society, especially after Annie Besant started to play a crucial role in this rival. Her propaganda went to such an extent as utter outrageous flattery of India and of everything connected with India. Later in 1904, the revivalists declared to organize the Madras Hindu Association to promote social and religious advancement on material lines in harmony with the spirit of Hindu civilization. A few extracts from the proceedings of the different sessions of the National Social Conference would bear out the fact that it devoted much of its energy for the emancipation of women and the institution of marriage. The fifth session of the National Social Conference declared that in the opinion of this conference, the movement in favor of the remarriage of child widows belonging to the higher caste of Hindus has now attained a stage where the active support of those who have openly taken part in the celebration of such marriage will not fail to ensure ultimate success. The conference also declared that the disfigurement of child widows before they attain the age of 18 and even after that age, without the consent of the widow, recorded in writing before a punch or magistrate, should be punished by law. It was a fact that from 1885 onwards, social issues had been discussed at the conference Pandal, after its deliberations had been over. In 1885, for example, the lectures on social problems delivered by Raghunath Rao and Ranade were attended, among others, by Evo Hume, Sir William Wedderburn, Professor Dadabhai, W.C. Banerjee, and Surendranath Banerjee. Congress presidents and leading members and hundreds of other delegates had been in the habit of attending and taking part in the deliberations of the social conference in their private capacity. But the Indian nationalism, which was essentially based on Hindu revivalism, in the pretext of putting an end to foreign domination and in the pursuit of political freedom, minimized and sometimes ignored the serious evils and imperfections in the society, and it felt that any attempt to solve problems would weaken the national front. An acute controversy whether social reform should precede or follow political reform was often carried on both in the press and public meeting in all the presidency towns. It was thought that since all social reforms in India directly or indirectly involved religious questions, they would Papa, sorry, an acute controversy whether social reform should precede or follow political reform was often carried on both in the press and public meeting in all the presidency towns. It was thought that since all social reforms in India directly or indirectly involved religious questions, they would rouse the greatest storm of protest. K. Subbarao remarked, "It is comparatively easy to demolish the Anglo-Indian government, not so the task of social reform. The burden of giving effect to the alterations that we might suggest is ours. The foreign rulers have nothing to do with them. The social reformer has therefore a more serious and difficult contest before him than the political reformer. If it is this increased responsibility that scares educated men away from social problems, they will hardly receive credit for courage." The Indian social reformer pointed out that a true patriot should labor to improve the condition of the Indian people from being treated as the depressed classes of the empire. He must plead with his countrymen for women's rights and with his rulers for men's rights. Since the last decade of the 19th century, particularly during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the controversy over the question of precedence was reaching new heights. This was reflected in the so-called Pandal issue when in 1895 objections were raised by the Congress against the social conference being held in the Congress Pandal, despite the
Sir, not audible, sir.
I'm sorry. Shall I repeat one sentence?
Sir.
Please? Now is it clear? Now? Okay, clear. Now is
Sir,
it
not
clear?
audible, sir.
Not audible.
It is audible here. We could hear Professor Jagadishan.
You could hear?
Yeah, from Sri Lanka, I could hear Professor. I am Dr. Anushya.
Okay.
How are you? I like to listen your talk. It is very audible here.
Okay. What about Professor Sundaram?
No.
Check
Yes,
your
sir, now only audible, sir.
check your mic, Professor Sundaram.
Okay. Now it's audible? Now it's audible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Shall I continue? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
Professor.
Since the last decade of the 19th century, particularly during the first two decades of the 20th century, the controversy over the question of precedence was reaching new heights. This was reflected in the so-called Pandal issue when in 1895 objections were raised by the Congress against the social conference being held in the Congress Pandal. Despite the support of the President, Ranade gave up the attempt of holding the session of the social conference in the Congress Pandal in defense to locate opinion in defense to local opinion at Pune and also in the larger interest of unity. On the other hand, Tilak and others thought that the awakening of political consciousness among the people and capture political powers for using it as an instrument for whatever reforms were necessary had a decisive preference and an undoubtedly priority in the scheme of things. When Tilak and his colleagues were invited by M.R. Jayakar to attend the Maharashtra Social Conference, which was held in May 1917, Tilak declined to attend and said, "Because I am unable to attend a conference, you must not imagine that I have no sympathy for the cause. One man alone cannot attend to all efforts, although he may desire to do so. I act on the principle of division of labor. But Jayakar and his colleagues stood for interdependence of social and political reform and desired to be the interpreters between the two extreme groups. He said, "We fail to understand how any can achieve political progress and at the same time oppose the march of social equality. We cannot understand the phenomenon which we observe in the present age of advanced political thinkers rebelling against the misuse of political powers by the British bureaucrat remaining dumb and acquiescent before the irrational tyranny of religious autocrats. Indian Indian Spectator argued that the social reforms were not only more urgent but were also easier than to achieve political reform. While the question of social reform was sorry, while the question of social reform was the India's own concern, that of the political reform had to depend upon the fact that the British government had to be convinced. Ranade declared that the social evolution must take place side by side if it should not precede the political growth that we desire to achieve. Manubhai Mehta declared in the 1907 session of the National Social Conference, "If you shut your eyes to the social activities and exercise only your political limb, the balance of power in the social frame is liable to be disturbed beyond all hope. There would be a chain of deformity of the whole structure and a possible paralysis of the whole organism." This controversy, which had started from 1880s, reached a point of decision during the first two decades of the 20th century. The social reform movement made its headway even after severing its ties with the Indian National Congress. Referring to the 1897 Social Conference, a reformer wrote that the social movement should be separated from the political and that the time has now come when social reformers should not remain content with having the conference as a humble appendage of the Congress, meeting by permission and favor. On 21st January 1912, the Indian social reformer remarked, "The social conference is in urgent need reconstruction. Everybody is fully aware by this time of the evils of female illiteracy, infant marriage, enforced widowhood, the Sastric authorities and the secular reasons for reform in these respects have been sufficiently lectured and written upon. And what is more, the number of educated women of rational marriages and of persons who disregard the caste rules in many unwholesome particulars has greatly increased. Resolutions advocating the education of women or condemning infant marriage seem to many a sad waste of time in these days. So the National Social Conference had achieved the claim that on such subjects as the education of women, foreign travel, the rising of the marriageable age, and even the remarriage of widows, there was little opposition by that time from educated Indians. With this, I want to conclude with one sentence that this trend of the political nationalism and social reform started in the 19th century, continued in a different uh, aspects or different pattern in the 20th century in Tamil Nadu concern. And that you can see the present Tamil Nadu since the dawn of the 20th century. Though it was not the old social reform movement like, but it was different. And politically also the Indian National Congress, and now it is a different thing. Anyway, the political movement versus the social reform movement continue to be there, running in the parallel line so far as the old Madras presidency concerned and so far as the present Tamil Nadu is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your enthusiastic talk. Now I open to forum for interact with Professor.
Hello. 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 Sundaram.
Yes, madam.
Yes, madam. I can hear you. I can hear you, madam.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, madam.
Sundaram. So nice.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Dr. PJ. So nice to see you. So nice to see you, PJ sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
After a long time, I'm so happy that you are the one who could connect nationalism with social reforms. That's a very interesting thing you have made. So I appreciate it, and thank you so much for the, learned lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. Madam regularly attending our seminar, sir.
Thank you.
Professor, I am Dr. Anushya. Thank you very much for
Thank you,
your
sir.
very enlightened talk regarding the political nationalism and social reforms. I could go back
Madam
to my...
Anushya, please introduce yourself.
Anushya, I can't see your face. Now it's okay.
I am here.
Yeah.
It was a very nice talk, Professor. It is a very enlightened talk. We could gain more information regarding the political nationalism and social reform. The leaders who really understood the nature of the society and wanted to go for the reforms in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. It was a very good talk, Professor. Nice to see you. I tried to talk to you, but I could not get your number, Professor. Many times I tried to talk to you, but it was a failure one. Nice to see you, Professor.
Okay. Thank you, Anushya.
Thank you very much.
Anybody
How
want
are you,
to interact
Professor?
with
How are you
Professor?
doing? How are you getting on?
I'm very fine.
Okay. I saw your picture in the Tamil Nadu History Conference at Thiruvannamalai.
Okay, let us not waste our time. The personal pleasantries. We can talk about the topic and the discussion.
Oh, okay.
Friends, professors, any questions? Now I invite Madam Kalyani propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to everyone who have joined with us for the 18th online lecture series. The Department of Indian History feel pride to conduct the Platinum Jubilee celebration of India's 75th independence. It's our bounden duty to propose to understand that this program. Our esteemed Chief Guest, Professor P. Jagadishan, former Vice Chancellor, Bharatidasan University, Tiruchirappalli, is widely known throughout India and abroad as a historian and an administrator, and he has spoken eloquently on advent of Indian nationalism, participation of modern Madras with a difference. Professor Jagdishan's speech on nationalism was in different perspectives, and he has focused the role of Madras presidency in freedom struggle. And his lecture was highly informative, analytical, and thought-provoking. Thank you, sir. We record our sincere thanks to Professor Sundaram, Chairperson, School of Historical Studies, University of Madras, for arranging this lecture series with great enthusiasm and endeavor. We are immensely thankful to Professor Sundaram. Thank you, sir. We are really grateful to all the esteemed historians, learned professors, and other dignitaries for honoring our invitation and also for their moral support. Last but not the least, we thank all the research scholars, postgraduate students for their gracious presence and active participation. And I also thank Professor Balambal and Anushya Madam for their constant presence in the lecture series throughout the lecture series. On the whole, the 18th lecture series was accomplished with a grand success. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Once again, I thank Professor Sundaram for inviting me to deliver this lecture. Thank you, one and all. I could see my colleague, I could see my old student here.
Sir,
Okay.
your voice is not audible.
My voice?
No,
Sometimes-
Sundaram sir's voice is not audible.
Sundaram.
Unmute your phone, sir. Sundaram sir.
Am I audible?
You are audible,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you.
Sir. Now it's okay.
Anushya,
Yeah,
nice
thank
seeing
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much, madam. I am working as a senior lecturer in the Department of Social Sciences. I was head of the department for 3 years.
Yeah, we met there
Yeah.
when you were in. Yeah,
Yeah. Now I am senior.
yeah. When you were in Peridenia, I met you.
Yeah. I was there for my research work. Yeah.
Thank you, Sundaram.
Thank you, madam. One more.
Thank you, ma. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Nice seeing you.
Sorry, sorry.
I'm
Shall I
talk
wind
to
up
you
now?
later.
One more lecture is there. After that, we convene the date. 20th is okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Sundaram. Professor, take care of yourself.